and welcome to Lakeside Drive. We have many, many thoughts about many, many things this weekend. Please join us while we attempt to untangle them, but likely make it worse. In this episode, we review the United States Grand Prix. And I'm joined by my friend and yours, Thomas J. Camp. How are you doing? You've had an early morning.
I've had early mornings every morning this weekend, so it was good. No, how good's Austin? Great. Yeah, it was a great weekend. Looked like an amazing event. You were sending photos through the whole time. All Blacks are in the World Cup final against South Africa, so that's very exciting too. So, yeah, what a great weekend of sport. Yeah. How was it?
Everything's coming up. Campy. Oh, it was fantastic. It was so great. I've got some souvenirs. We're going to do a quick show and tell.
Nice.
I know this is a podcast, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it up to the screen and you can describe what you see for our listeners.
Yeah.
This is the first purchase from the weekend.
Texas boots. Love that.
Describe the boots, Campy. Describe these boots for our listeners. What do you see? Give us your fashion analysis.
It's not quite a beige suede, but it's more of like a lighter caramel side, or caramel for our American listeners. And there's a few, what are they, native Indian patterns sort of, burnt into the leather? Is that what I'm saying correctly? So, very cool.
Yeah, it's like stitched in. They are very cool. They got their first night out last night, so they're already getting some good wear. And the other one is, this was giving me some good sun protection on the weekend. Tell us what you see.
Oh, just the good old hat. Doesn't have a flap, unfortunately, but it's got a howdy on the front of it, so very nice.
It does. So we picked up some good merch and it's already been put to very good use, keeping us sun smart and our feet well protected. So, no, it's been an awesome weekend and we'll get stuck into the experience, I suppose, when we talk about the weekend as a whole. But just first of all, to get us started, let's talk about some of the most pressing news which we need to discuss as the official, regulators of this sport, Campy, which we are. Now, it came out after the race, sometime after the race, that both Hamilton and Leclerc were disqualified. Before we get stuck into it, I'm just going to go through a quick summary as to why that was the case for anybody who's perhaps not as familiar with this part of the car. So basically, underneath the car, you've got the plank. It's also called the skid block. It was introduced in 1994, and it's to make sure that the cars don't run too close to the ground, basically. So the thickness of the plank has to be 10 millimeters, plus or minus 0.2. So they also allow a bit of kind of wiggle room of a millimetre just to normal wear and tear. Now, what they do after each race is a standard check. It's a physical floor and plank wear inspection, which they did this weekend on Hamilton, Leclerc, Verstappen and Norris's car. Of course, we learned that both Hamilton and Leclerc's car breached the acceptable 9 millimetre wear. Now, what's really interesting this weekend, it was kind of a unique combination of variables, Campy, in that we have a sprint weekend. So Parc Fermé conditions begin on the Friday when they go out for qualifying, and then that car has to make it through qualifying, the sprint shootout, the sprint, and the Grand Prix. And of course, it's a really bumpy track. So interesting conditions, and not necessarily that surprising that this is the track that, we found this issue in two of the cars. What was your reaction when we learned this news?
Well, I was pretty disappointed, if I'm honest. I just think it's just an overreach, and it's a bit the legality of it for me. It's just a bit over the top. I think taking all the things into consideration that you just said, and the fact that this track has deteriorated from what it was originally designed to do appallingly year after year, and it gets worse and worse. I think they did some work at least on the front straight this year. But that run up into turn one, that left-hand turn they take, that is, for the last few years, that's all we've talked about over the whole weekend. So I think a bit of leeway is there, but then the reality is they're running the car too low, which is causing it to happen. yes, there's a whole element of issues that cause this problem, but every other team did it on track too, so got it right. So I struggle with it a bit. I think the championship's over. Lewis Hamilton on a podium for the second time this year. I think it was good for him, and that Mercedes looks quick with their upgraded floor that they bought this weekend. So yeah, it's a bit frustrating. Sonoda gets an extra couple of points too, which means it sucks for Danny Ric, but not that that's really the big deal. Yeah, and post-race, I don't like it post-race after we've celebrated the podiums, all the interviews are done, the weekend's happened, and then 4 or 5 hours after the event, that chooses to happen. Now, it has to happen at some time, but I just think they could possibly, they have sensors everywhere in the car, why don't they just put a sticker ingrained in the floor at 9mm so that if it's exposed, they just put a camera underneath, and if you can see the sticker, well, then you're illegal. Or something like that. Anyway, it's a bit frustrating for me, and the whole weekend lost a bit of its glossy shine.
I think that's it. It's not so much, I think, anybody kind of disagreeing that it wasn't the right thing to do. Like you said, their rules, every other team, well, we don't actually know if every other team got it right because they don't inspect all cars, which is a fair question. I think a lot of people did say, well, wait a second, these two got disqualified. Why didn't you check the rest of the cars if you already know that there's two? But that's not how these work. The idea, there's just not time. There's not time to go and inspect every single part of every single car afterwards. The randomized checks is meant to be a deterrent in order to help the teams be motivated to get it right in terms of their setup being within the rules and regulations. I think, to your point, the issue that many of us people have with it is the experience impact, I suppose. And it was things like, because there was a lot of crowd booing and this, that, and the other, it was that idea of going, well, we booed for no reason. And poor Logan Sargent got his first point and there was no celebration for it. And where it could get interesting, I think, is because Mercedes in particular have really pointed to the track in terms of saying, that's the reason why we had this issue here. So I think COTA might have to put their thinking beanies on and see what they can come up with to try and make sure it's a track that they keep wanting to go back to and to race at. We know that they put on a good show and the drivers like being there, but that's not always enough, especially when they are looking at different tracks over in the US. But I think overall, when it comes to being the governing body that we are, Campy, we can probably agree that it's frustrating but was the right thing to do. The other thing I just wanted to mention, we're not going to go into all details about F1 Academy in this episode. I'm going to do a full separate episode, so look out for that coming up and we'll look at the entire season. But we did have our first ever F1 Academy champion crowned, so Marta Garcia, well done. And it was awesome. I'm not sure you can tell us how much you saw on the broadcast about this, but certainly for our perspective there, it felt like there was a really big turnout in terms of supporting that group, particularly from the Mercedes drivers, actually, George Russell and Lewis Hamilton going down and supporting them in the F1 Academy paddock. And I think George was actually doing some presentations as well. Did you see much of it as part of the broadcast, Campy?
No, I didn't. It just didn't happen. I didn't watch a lot of the extras on the weekend. It was just replays and stuff. So, and I skipped through all the stuff at the start of stuff. So I didn't see heaps of it. But
So we've had our first kind of driver signing for next year. It's Bianca Bustamante, who's a Filipino driver. And that was really exciting. We saw a lot of them interviewed on stage at the track with Lizzie McIntosh and Laura Winter. So they were getting lots of airtime when it came to opportunities to engage with the crowd and presenters. And I saw that they were on the post-race show as well. So great to see they did get some coverage, and we look forward to seeing all of their races being broadcast next year. But as I mentioned, we'll do a full episode and talk all about F1 Academy separately. Let's jump into our Discord comment of the week. The official Discord comment of the week, I'm going to let James allocate this one so he can feel included in this podcast still from afar while he continues to work on his recovery. He has said which is as follows: Zach Brown will will out how marketable he is to a certain demographic or whatever, and I will lose the will to live. Obviously referring to Lando Norris.
Very good.
I couldn't believe how many Lando supporters there were, Campy. I had to really master my kind of pleasant complimentary face instead of just yelling why at people. There was a lot of support for him in Coda.
Well, are they real supporters? That's the real question. They drive to survive fans, and are they young girls under 25 that think he's the cutest thing alive? I understand that appeal. Is he as cute as Danny Ric? Not a chance. That smile, that beats everything. But maybe that's what it is. No, he's a well-liked character, and you give him a bit of shit here on Lakeside Drive, but I'm sure he's around the world. He's well-loved and well-liked by the younger generation. Anyway, good for him.
I just enjoy the fact that we now know that Campy understands the perspective of a 22-year-old girl, so that's always good to know. What was your Discord legend of the week?
So we have a photo here from one of the greatest movies of all time. It was Wayne's World, and it's the scene where they're singing Bohemian Rhapsody in the car and headbanging. And one of the comments from GSA is, these days it's driving a Mercedes van with a banging sound system but listening to a podcast instead. And Tilly Willy 13 comes in with ditto my Kia Sorrento. So who would drive a Kia and a Sorrento? I have no idea. But that's a cracking comment right there.
Excellent. Well done. Mine is going to Protagoras, who, after we learned that Lando was driver of the day, asks this very fair question, which is driver of the day just Sky UK or all of F1? We hear you. It can feel like that sometimes.
Well, Oscar got it. Oscar beat him like 2 weeks ago on his after his second place, so that's good. But is that just because he's new and shiny and everyone's giving him a bit of a kudos claps because, hey, he's done well on his first race, first official podium?
I'm going to choose to say I think that's not it. But although actually that does remind me of a funny comment that came out of Lando this weekend, because he was saying that Qatar was probably their biggest opportunity this year. I was like, oh, you mean Qatar where Oscar beat you? Loved it.
Oh, savage.
Alrighty, let's get stuck into the weekend coverage, talking about broadcast. Now, I know you weren't able to watch as much potentially, and of course I wasn't watching the broadcast because we were there, but let's start with the anthem, Campy. Mixed reviews. It's a tough crowd. Give us your honest opinion as you slap your chest.
I love the US anthem. That is being in that country when they sing the anthem at absolutely everything, and how passionate and patriotic people are about their country, and particularly in that part of the world. I was genuinely got quite emotional when I was watching it, seeing all these people, because I wasn't a super patriotic guy but I came back and I was like, yeah, I need to love my country a bit more just because of that. So I dug the anthem. It was a bit like the Pump Goes Pop acoustic version CDs compilations from back in the day. I thought it felt really good. The acoustic guitar was good. It had a good feel to it. It was nice and smooth. I can see why people didn't love it, but hey, I was into it. I loved it. It was the greatest anthem of all time for me.
There were some comments suggesting that it was a little bit lullaby-esque, but luckily there was enough fireworks and helicopters to keep us awake, even if that was the effect that it had on you as a watcher and listener. Now, here's some of the comments from the Discord about the broadcast this weekend. We've got one comment here saying, for the love of Ricardo, could the TV director please show us an overtake from one of the dozens of cameras around the track rather than a garbage onboard view? Another comment says, the TV coverage for midfield and lower is woeful. That's literally where all the action is happening. The front of the pack is pretty much sorted and set and forget. What are your thoughts about what the viewing experience was like?
Oh, I didn't watch, as I said earlier, I didn't watch a lot of the off-track stuff, but yeah, it is frustrating now that Danny Ric is back on the grid, and unfortunately for us, he's driving in that bottom 10 most of the time. it is frustrating because you're watching it play out on the timing screens to the left, and you are seeing him bring gaps of 5 seconds down to nothing and then passing people, but just sort it out. We're not seeing a lot of passing like we did earlier in the year, so they should at least show us all of them at some stage. So.
Yeah, exactly. When they happen, give them to us. We want to see it. As much as we love the inevitability of Max driving off into the summer, even when he does have to work for it like he did this weekend, we want to see what's happening behind him. There's a few other things just in terms of this weekend that I thought I would share in terms of the on-track experience or the on-location experience. The first one, and this is going to be on behalf of James again, is the lack of flyover. Now, we were there and we were watching this skydiver come down with a giant American flag. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. That's excellent. And then the fireworks went off, and then everyone kind of stood around waiting. And then a couple more fireworks went off, at which point there was a helicopter directly above them, and the entire crowd around us literally just had their heart in their mouth, and there was absolutely no way that helicopter knew they were about to happen, and you watched him suddenly try and get out of there. It was near catastrophe. But then we all stood around waiting. I was like, where are my jets? Where are my fighter jets? I really thought we were going to have a really impressive flyover. What else is the US good for? You're going to have a massive military. You're going to have a massive military. At least get a flyover. Exactly.
Give me a Judd helicopter. We want F-35s.
Give me a
or
nearly
the Raptors.
crashing helicopter. Exactly. So, and we were all kind of looking around, and we even had some hypotheses because we saw some commercial flights kind of head towards the track but then turn off. I was like, oh yeah, they must have cleared, this is a no-fly zone, and everyone was kind of waiting for it. And then, you're watching your clock tick by and you go, no, there's not enough time now. So that was actually really disappointing. I wanted fighter jets, and I had a helicopter nearly crash. But I will say that this skydiver was very cool. Some other things about the weekend, just in terms of, I suppose, the experience there, and if anyone's thinking of going, definitely the best experience I've had in terms of GA, right? So getting out there, the shuttle works pretty well. I mean, it's obviously a logistical nightmare, but they had a pretty cracking effort at getting everybody out there, and just having continuous massive shuttles coming and going from town. So that works pretty well. Just in terms of food and drink and everything else, heaps of options, and all really great. So of course it's expensive, but it's always going to be. So we loved that side of it. It was really hot. Like, to say, I know the humidity wasn't as significant as it is in other places, but it was really hot. So the lack of shade is probably my biggest kind of comment or bone to pick. It's pretty hard to try and not get scorched while you're out there. There were also 2 performances, both of which I attended, and this is something which I think there's a couple of Discord members who we're gonna have to take this outside, because they were there saying that Queen was shit. And I just want to say, well, you can't bring Freddie Mercury back from the dead.
Even if it is with Lambert, that's okay.
Absolute rock stars, 100%. So here's my 3 things about the Queen performance. All right, it's a really tough crowd. It's a Formula One crowd. These are not people who are obsessed with Queen and have come to see Queen and are going to be easily entertained kind of by their music, right? So it's a tough crowd. It's also a difficult setting. You're just on this massive hill. There's not much of an incline. So if you're kind of towards the back, you can't really see much. So it's not it's great open space, fits lots of people, but it's not great in terms of, I suppose, the viewing experience. But finally, and this is a bit more niche, he's not Freddie, and he's not trying to be Freddie. And I encourage you to go and watch the documentary where they talk about why they chose Adam Lambert, because they've said he's the first person who we met who isn't trying to be him. He's just taking it and performing it in his own way whilst kind of honouring Freddie in the way that he goes about it. So anybody who thought that was terrible, you can get in the bin and stay there.
We would all love Oasis to do a comeback, but it just ain't going to happen. You know what? There is bands that I've never got to see, and Queen is one of the bands I haven't got to see. And I don't care if it's with Mercury or not. Mercury was gone before I was born, so the reality is I was never going to see it. So any opportunity to see a behemoth of the music industry like that, bring it on. Now, did you get into town to see Stapleton?
Absolutely.
Come on!
I did not see him, but I am wearing my Chris Stapleton t-shirt.
No sleeves
because,
too.
I feel bad. Yeah, no sleeves. I've gone full America, Campy. We didn't get in to see him, unfortunately. So I'm wearing a t-shirt in his honour. There was just too much on for the weekend. But I did see Tiesto, who is the absolute shit, by the way. He was so great. He was loving life. The crowd was loving it. And that was a great spot. It was at a different amphitheatre, much smaller. And it was at the end of the race, so everyone's in really high spirits. They're all ready for a party, and he absolutely brought it. So I don't care how old he is or how old that makes me. I'm here for it, and he put on an excellent show. So overall, for our Tommy T's broadcast review, what are you giving it out of 10?
Oh, I'm good. 7, because it's Texas and it's America, so what could possibly go wrong?
I'm going to give it a 7.5, and it could have been brought up to an 8 if we'd had that flyover, but you've left me disappointed, I'm afraid. Okay, let's review our predictions from the weekend. So quick reminder, Campy on the front row had Verstappen and Piastri. You had on your podium Piastri, Verstappen and Hamilton, and then you had Gasly in 10th. So,
Nah.
I mean, nah.
Max doesn't count because he's won everything this year. So, yeah, it's the other ones you're looking at. I had Hamilton on there too, which, well, yeah, maybe I did all right. No, not too bad. How'd you go?
Middle of the row, I had Verstappen and Sainz as my front row, and my podium was Verstappen, Hamilton, and Piastri. So I did have Verstappen and Hamilton in the correct places, so I feel like that's something. And then Checo in 10th. So maybe we've broken the curse because both Gasly and Checo finished pretty well. And then James, we were giving him a bit of shit last week, but his actual prediction was front row Verstappen and Piastri, same as you. Podium was Verstappen, Piastri, and Russell. So, no, sorry, James, you're not getting that one. And you did have Albon in 10th, though. Yeah, no good at all for Russell George. But Albon in 10th was a decent call. So, look, I think we've broken some curses, and that's something to celebrate. Now let's get into our team-by-team analysis. This is a pretty entangled mess of an order to go through, Campy, because we've got so many teams where you had one person who did all right, the other one DNF and that type of thing. Yep. So they're about as organised as my thoughts right now. But let's start with HAAS. They were both in the pit lane. Their upgrades didn't really work as planned. What were your reflections on their performance this weekend?
Again, didn't see a lot of them. They starting from the back with the Aston Martins too, they sort of got left in their wake a bit. By mid-race, they'd caught up to they were in the, they were at least surrounding other cars. Yeah, it's a shame for them as an organisation bringing the upgrades. It was supposed to be their big weekend where they had 2 chances of qualifying, and we know what they've done in qualifying at times this year. So it would have been great for them to perform on home soil, but unfortunately it didn't work out that way. And when they're trying to make setup changes before the race under Perk Farmer in order to get the results they want, it's frustrating for them that it didn't work out on track. So I don't think either driver or the organisation would be wholly impressed with the way their weekend turned out. But that's just the reality. Sometimes they've just got to get better.
Yeah, they're going to have some work to do for their last couple of races. I think the tricky thing is now with a team like that at this point in the season, I was actually quite surprised that they were still trying to bring an upgrade, that they haven't just thrown their effort into next year. But hopefully they can get a couple of decent qualifyings under their belt before we wrap up the 2023 season. Let's talk about Alfa Romeo. They, I think, would be quite hopeful going into Mexico. They couldn't run the heights that they wanted to because of the bumps. Now, that I find interesting because they wanted to run their car lower, but didn't because they were like, it's not going to work because of the bumps. So that's kind of interesting given what we were talking about earlier. Bottas qualified 13th, finished 12th after the promotions basically, and Zhou qualified 12th, finished 13th. They said that they were struggling with pace under high fuel loads, and I'm just wondering how much that has to do with the sprint setup, and that they don't get much of those long runs under high fuel loads when it comes to practice. Did you take much away in terms of how you think about a sprint weekend and teams like this and how they have to go about their setup and their practice time and all that type of thing?
What I like about it is it throws everything up in the air. You have to do all the work in your factory beforehand on the simulator and get the setups that you want. And I think if you don't have the correlation between on track and then back onto your computer system, like the gap between reality and that computer, it stuffs it up. And we saw that. You get an hour in a car to do your practice, and then you're straight into a qualifying, and then your next session is another qualifying session into a sprint race, into a race. So there is not time to adjust and figure out the direction that the car needs to go. So I like it. I like it for the odd weekend here and there. I wouldn't like it every race weekend. I don't think that's what we want to see. I'm a bit of a purist at heart. I like the old hour and a half sessions on a Friday, not the hour sessions. So I think it's good every now and then. 2 or 3 times a year, that's fine. We can have a sprint race weekend, but every weekend I don't like it. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work out for some teams when they get it horribly wrong. Alfa were good this weekend in the sense that in the sprint race, Joe was looks like he had some pace. He's making some passes. I think he's in the points at one stage. He was 10th and he was trying to get up into 8th or something like, I can't remember. But yeah, they were good. I think they would have wanted a bit more out of the car, but it's interesting that they to make the ride of their car higher, because with a car that has ground effect, and the whole idea of it is the lower you get, the suction that's how you create the suction to the floor on the downforce. The higher that your car is riding, because of the ride height, lessens all your aerodynamics. I can imagine what a 1.5 millimetre change would make to the whole setup of the car. The car would do things normally that you'd expect it to do, but then you raise it and it would do things that you never expected so far out of the operating parameters that you're expecting. So, look, it's frustrating for them, but they got it right. Unfortunately, they didn't get points, but would it be worth them from a media or a marketing sort of lens to just run the car how they wanted to, extract as much pace out of it, get into the points, and then kick up a song and dance about how bad the track is afterwards? That for me, the team
and then
like
get disqualified.
Yeah, that's how you play it.
Well, we now know what would happen if Campy was team principal. I think it's interesting. It's a good reminder that this is a game of millimetres, not inches. Tiny little adjustments like that make a really big difference. Let's move on to AlphaTauri. So we had Ricciardo back. It was his first race back after his injury. Definitely not the weekend that he would have been after. And he said that he was looking back at his race, both in terms of the sprint race, but also on Sunday. And he said that he kind of felt like he made a couple of moves where he said, I should know better than that. So it's obviously going to take him a couple of races to get back into the swing of things. I don't think he has those, if I'm being honest. I think he is under as much pressure as anybody else. As much as he's got the drive for next year, it's not the drive that he wants, as I think we're all pretty kind of clued into. But the tricky thing for him in his car in the race was the second they put those hard tyres on, it just totally dropped away. How heartbroken were you not to see him in the points?
You know what? I actually wasn't too bad. The sprint race, just remember, this guy had two races in the car, or one race, then broke his hand the following weekend, sat out, and then he's had the last 6 to 8 weeks off. So for him to come into a sprint race weekend in a car that's dramatically changed since he last got into it, have an hour driving it to try and figure out the setup, albeit in qualifying for the actual race, he qualified 15th and got knocked out of Q1, which is a shame, and got beaten by his teammate. Q2, qualified P11. Sorry, in the sprint shootout.
For the sprint, yeah.
Yeah, so the second day comes in, puts it on P11, and his race pace was excellent. Got a crap start. Why he put him... I don't think... He got a crap start. He got caught on the inside and got pinched really hard and lost 3 positions off the start in the sprint race. But all he did the next for that whole race was just pick people off. He passed Stroll on track in an Aston Martin, which Alfa Tauri shouldn't be doing. And he was hunting down whoever was in front of him at the time. I think in the last 5 laps, I think it was Ocon. He bridged the gap from 5 seconds down to just got into DRS and was right up his backside. So he had some genuine pace in that car on the Saturday. And he did yesterday too in the race. He started 5 or 6 or 4 positions behind his teammate, got up behind him when it was them 2 by 2. He got the gap down to 2 seconds, and then the pit stops happened, and he decided to go long on that strategy because he showed such good pace on those tyres the previous day after 19, 20 laps. And, strategy hurt him a lot. But even being on those hard tyres and how poor they were, he still got back after the second stint, after everything played out and positions reshuffled themselves to what they should have been. He was still 2 seconds behind Tsunoda. Fell off, it wasn't going to work. Now, so Tsunoda took the shine, but I think that team behind closed doors was looking at the race pace, and they were looking at the way Danny Ric drove that car, and sometimes results don't go your way, and that's fine. But he dominated Tsunoda this weekend, albeit except for the first qualifying session. So I was excited for him. So I was disappointed about his result, but I was excited that he got back in and showed he was the class driver that he is.
So quick story about him this weekend. I think it was on the Friday night we were out wandering around town, and I remembered that he was doing an Enchante pop-up in the city. So we're like, I'll go see if it's still open. So we walked down there and just got to the door, and there was a couple of people kind of milling around. I was like, oh yeah, it must still be open. Got to the door, at which point I realised that he's actually on stage with Rob Baird. And we were literally about to walk straight in, and then somebody asked us, they're like, oh, what's your name? Are you on the list? And we were like, oh, this is a private event. But we watched from the door for a minute as he introduced.
You should have said I'm Australian. Let me in, dickheads.
Yeah. It was so funny because I think we were so oblivious to what was going on that when you then suddenly kind of dial into your surroundings, Jack Doohan was right behind us, and then you kind of start spotting different faces, but we were totally oblivious to what was going on around us, that we just kind of unknowingly walked into a who's who of Australian sport, basically. So that was quite entertaining. Just sticking with Alfa Tauri for a second to talk about Yuki. We just got some classic Yuki this weekend, which, as you said, it did kind of get a bit of the spotlight, but that's great. Good on him. He's currently sitting 16th in the Drivers' Championship. He took that fastest lap on the very last lap. They brought him in for softs, which he didn't know that they were going to do. He was like, why am I coming in? And he's like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. So that was great. And on you, Yuki, we love seeing you doing well. And he's also really respectful of his teammates, always has been, which is something that I really like to see.
And what did he finish in the end? 7th or 8th in the end?
8th. Yeah.
Yeah, so he got
8th after being promoted.
Yeah, so he got 6 points in the end. Jeez.
Good little collection, little points haul. He
did have a good weekend, and the car, I think, showed some pace. The fact that he could pit with 2 laps to go and still have a pit stops gap to the teams behind him shows that car has definitely moved forward since the mid-season break. So,
yep, good to see. We love it. Aston Martin. Tricky weekend for them. So they both started from the pit lane because basically they, after making massive changes, which they just decided that they had to do, and they said it felt much better after they had made those changes. So probably a good decision from them. Difficult weekend, but that was the right call, especially when you see, for example, Stroll's improvement. So he started from the pit lane finished in 9th, was promoted to 7th, which is good to see. You know, you've got to make difficult decisions on a weekend like this, and that's one of them, and it looks like it paid off for them. Pretty devastating for Alonso to see him have to retire. He had floor damage after they had made that decision, and he felt like they were going to have decent pace with the changes that they had made. What were your thoughts for Aston Martin generally this weekend?
Yeah, it was a good move to start from the pit because they both got knocked out of Q3, so in that first qualifying session on Friday. So, you know, they brought some upgrades to the car and they got on track and they really didn't correlate anything to what they thought it was going to be. So they had to make some decisions. They'll be going back to the drawing board for the next race in Mexico and trying to figure out what happened off track and in their simulations and their data. So, but again, you need time to put these things on cars and really understand how they're affecting the car as a whole too. I mean, Mark Webber used the analogy that it's a bit like, oh, why can't you just change this part out? And he said it's a bit like moving a pull from place A to place B and thinking it's a simple solution. No, everything has to change about the whole installation process in the cars. So that gives you an idea of just how minute changes can affect these cars massively. So when you are driving such a high level what you do in F1 and the technology that comes with it, the smallest change can give you massive increases or decreases in your overall speed, car feeling, durability, wear on tyres, etc., etc. So, yeah, they got it wrong this weekend, but it was probably a good weekend for Stroll to fight back and do a good job. But so he should be in that car. That car should have a base standard, which if he starts from the pit anywhere, he should generally break back into the top 10. So, is it a thumbs up for him and the result? It probably looks better because he gained those extra 2 positions because of the DQs, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
We don't need to talk about Stroll anymore, do we? His dad came out and defended him this week, as all good fathers should.
Okay, moving on to Williams. Both did better than expected this weekend. Also, just in terms of on track, their liveries looked amazing, absolutely amazing. They looked so great on track, and they got quite a lot of cheers as well. People were really keen to get around them, which was great. We saw a lot of cowboy hats with giant Duracell batteries on top of them, which was also excellent. So Sargent qualified 20th, finished 10th. So first points for Sargent after the DQs and that promotion, which is really exciting for him. You know, and I'm sad, like I said, we were talking about earlier, that he didn't get the appropriate celebration for that because it's quite momentous for him. You know, it's been a long time coming. He's had a really difficult season and he's very honest about it. And I think this is the difference with, performance on track, is that he will come out and say, look, I made these mistakes and it was me. This weekend he hit sausage curb. He lost a few places from that. But he's just very kind of honest and tells us what happened, tells us when it was him, tells us when it was a strategy issue, whatever it might be, and doesn't really shy away from just talking about how his performance in a really honest way, which I quite like. Albon qualified 18th, finished in 9th after his promotion. So all in all, a surprisingly good weekend for Williams.
Yeah, look. Personally, I like Sargent. I like the way he approaches it. We've been critical of his results and his spot on the grid, and that's cool because that's what we do. But yeah, you're right. He approaches the personality side of it great. Big weekend for him this weekend. It's his second race in the US this year. So Texas is the original, or not the original, but the American track that we've had on the calendar for the last decade now. So. Big moment for him, and to score the points the way he did, I just don't think we got to celebrate it the way that it was deserved. I'm shame for him. I mean, it's big enough just to get into F3 or F2 and have the financial backing to do so, but then to actually get into F1 and then get on the grid, and then if we had our point sister from yesteryear, to even score points in Formula One's a massive deal. You're in a pretty small elite club of human beings over the... there'd probably be only 1,000 people to score points in Formula One over its history. So, look, unfortunate for him, but I'll stay for him and I'll stay for Williams. Albon didn't get the most out of the car this weekend. He had some strategy issues, and I know they pitted early, tried to go to HAAS with the strategy, but it worked out for them, and they leapfrogged their main competitors like the HAAS and the Alfa Romeos like they should have. So, yeah, it's probably overall a good weekend, good result for them.
Let's just take a quick break and we'll be back shortly. And we're back. Let's get stuck in talking about Alpine. So we had a 6th place and a DNF, yet another one for the Alpines this weekend. So Ocon now has the highest number of DNFs this season, and he had contact with Oscar, which saw him out of the race. But so a great qualifying effort from both these cars. I'm going to hand this one over to you, Campy. Off you go.
Fucking Ocon, seriously. This is the team that I just... Every week you're trying to find good things to say about them, and this happens. Oh, look, I think the first one was a bit of a racing incident. The race yesterday, I think I'll put sheerly all of the blame on him. His car awareness this weekend, and ruined Oscar's race too, in both races, really. So, yeah, look, real shame. You can understand crashes happening and mistakes happening, but 2 weekends in a row being in that position, 2 races over a weekend, that is frustrating. But the car seemed to be performing this week. Gasly had a good result too, with a couple of disqualifications, so it looks better on paper than what it actually was. But good on him, good on them. They've got a car. Their baseline is. They're a funny team because they've performed, like I'll go back to the years Danny Ric was there, and they had a purple patch where he was top 5 for 12 of the 20 races we had, and there was a few weeks in there where he got podiums consistently, and was 2 or 3 seconds behind the podiums. He was driving really well. So that car for me should have a base level that is fairly competitive. It's just it seems to be that extra 1 or 2% they need at the top end of the car, and maybe they get that from a driver change, or maybe they get that from the new investment in the team and the restructure that's going under at the moment. But for me, they're a frustrating team because they should be better than what they are. All the resources, probably the biggest OEM in the world, albeit they're French. So, look, it's frustrating. They should be better.
Yes, that was news that came out over the course of the week, was the new investment group for Alpine, basically a myriad of who's who of athletes and other sports coming in and investing in Alpine, which was interesting. It kind of ruffled a lot of feathers, and people were very excited about it. And I suppose I looked at it and I thought, it confuses me, to be entirely honest. And at the end of the day, they still don't have a team principal. So you can have all of these people interested in your team, but you still need to be able to deliver when it comes to your organizational structure and translating that to, operational processes and performance on track. So I found that news a little bit confusing, to be honest, when it comes to the team and the sport and why, especially because a lot of them are Americans and it's a French team. To me, a lot of it didn't really line up, but we'll see if there's anything interesting that does come from that news, probably not for the next couple of seasons.
I'll just say, we spoke about it when the guy, Ryan Reynolds, and his mate bought in for a percentage of it. And what they've done with that footy club over there, I can see what they're trying to do for Alpine sport. But as the FIA and Formula One ticks off on all these investments before, you have to go through the process of making sure that we want you in the sport, a la all of the Russian driving Nikita Mazepin. That won't happen again in this sport. So the hoops you've got to jump through, I think, are a good thing. The flip side is, don't treat Andretti Motorsport with the bullshit you've treated them in the last 3 years trying to break into this sport and get on the grid. And then rush these decisions through about the personnel that are allowed to invest in Alpine. I don't like it. It's not a good look. Because Andretti is a motorsport. It's got a long history, particularly in America. It's got success in every category that it's ever run. It's got massive junior programs, massive developments for motorsport as a whole, but yet he's made to jump through hoops that just are seemingly impossible. I don't like it. So sort that out, F1.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's especially with them, they've shown their kind of commitment and dedication, obviously, to motorsport through their years and years in what they're doing in other categories. And I think the thing that I get concerned about sometimes, particularly at the moment with F1, when you see those types of characters coming in as we have with Alpine investors, is that you get that sense of looking for the next shiny thing. And so how long is that commitment going to last? How dedicated are you actually? I mean, you'd hope that it's big, given what I'm sure will be a lot of money that they're putting in, but there isn't that kind of, I suppose, historical demonstration of interest in the sport, interest in trying to make it progress. They're not people who you see on the grid walk, weekend in, weekend out, because they're loving the sport like you do with people like David Beckham and Patrick Dempsey. Will.i.am, think whatever you want of him. He loves the sport and wants to be involved and keeps showing up everywhere. These people have had nothing to do with F1 as far as I am aware. That could be wrong, but I just think that track record, as you're talking about, when it comes to their dedication and commitment to trying to elevate motorsport as a whole, and in doing so being part of this category, would only be a good thing. And like you said, they've got the history behind them. All right, let's move on to Ferrari. So we had just some more heartbreak, because though they couldn't have any more. Leclerc putting it on pole. He thought that he had been disqualified, or he'd had his lap time deleted for track limits. Turns out that was for Max Verstappen. He didn't have a great strategy this weekend, and he dropped behind Lando Norris into 7th in the Drivers' Championship as a result of this weekend. Sainz qualified 4th, finished, 3rd actually, I think now, after the DQ. So back on the podium. I think that makes my prediction a bit more solid. I thought that he might do pole week this weekend. He managed his tyres really well, though, and it's not something we often say about Ferrari. He seemed to have a really solid race in comparison to Leclerc, which just felt a little bit more fragile in terms of how they were going about things. Anything shocking for you this weekend with the two drivers from Ferrari?
Oh, look, Leclerc, for me, if we take the last 7 or 8 races, for me, something's happened to him in the car, and I'm not sure what it is. It's totally right. That word's the best word. Fragile. We know what he can do. We know he can perform, and we know he's a world-class driver. But he's been put under pressure by Carlos, and Carlos has got some results over him. Seemingly things have shifted in the direction that we're probably pushing towards Leclerc getting another big contract extension, and Ferrari backing him for the next 4 or 5 years to get them the World Championship. I think that tide's changed a bit, and I think we've seen that in the way of the bit of the driving. Leclerc's had some races where he's been absolutely nowhere. Albeit he wasn't nowhere this weekend. Still relatively close, but Carlos is definitely getting the better of his teammate at the moment, and I think that pressure I think this is the first time in Leclerc's career, really, where that pressure is starting to show on his on-track performances. And we know he wants it, but he's just trying too hard. Carlos has always been great on his tyres. And this is the track where you need to be extra careful on your tyres, because there's so many variables and they didn't know how things were going to play out. They hadn't even tested the hard tyre before they had to use it in a race condition under high fuel loads. So, yeah, I think Carlos is playing the smart game at the moment.
Yeah, he's certainly had a resurgence, that is for sure, and he's putting the pressure on Leclerc, which is fantastic, I think. You want to have two drivers that are pushing each other constantly. I don't think it's a good look for a team, and I don't think you get the best out of each of the teammates when one is so dominant over the other. If we kind of look at what's happening, as much as it's a while back, but when we did have Max and Checo actually both up there in the earlier stages of the season, you can see them pushing each other really well. Whereas it's not great for teammates or the sport when you have one starting to just dominate the other. So I think the pressure that you have between those two is actually really good. It's just about how they're going to manage it within the team. And like you said, Leclerc, there's just something potentially they need to look at this weekend. But like you said, he wasn't nowhere. Would have finished 6th had his result stood. Moving on to McLaren, heartbreak for our boy Campy. He is sitting ninth in the drivers' championship at the moment, but this weekend was just not to be for him.
Yeah, he was that 2/10 off his teammate, which is where he's probably been at the start of the year. It's hard though. He's never raced this track before, first time on it. We saw that he went to Japan and everyone's going, this is the first time he's driven at this track. Excellent. This was one of those weekends. I don't think it was a rookie weekend because he still performed excellently and he still put the car in positions that we expect him to be. And at times he was up the front, putting laps together that suggested, this kid's got the talent. But he didn't put it all together. And he himself, he approached it. He said, yeah, look, it's not my greatest weekend. I struggled to get on top of it. Obviously, incidents on the first laps of each race suffered him. The results suffered accordingly. But he'll take that one in his stride. It's a learning opportunity for him, the whole experience. He's got to have all these good and bad, up and down weekends. You're going to get that from a rookie, and a lot of it, some of it's not his fault, but some of it was his fault too. He wasn't extracting the pace out of the car that we know he's capable of. But that'll come with experience, and Oscar's a kid that doesn't make the same mistakes twice. He genuinely learns things from every race weekend. So going into Mexico, he'll be great. He's not raced there either, but it's another learning experience. He'll, hopefully gets on track and does what we know he can do. I think he's got a great mentor in Webber. Webber was known as the guy to set up cars and build cars from scratch. Look what happened with that Red Bull. So I think helping him off garage and the mentorship off track and talking to engineers and getting the best out of cars, learning the terminologies and the language that go with it, but how to explain what's happening in the car, on track, off track. Look, the future's bright for Oscar. We don't need to worry about this weekend. Be a footnote in his Formula One history by the time he finishes. He'll be a multi-time world champion, and we'll go from there. So look, I'm not too fussed.
His teammate Lando Norris started second, finished third, but then promoted to second. He had a great start. He was leading this race for a while. He had some battles with Max about halfway through the race, but that was to me just evidence that you just can't hold off Max in a Red Bull. It looked good for a couple of corners, but there's just no way that he can hold him off. No one can. This is his fourth successive podium, so he's on a bit of a streak. And look, whatever like we said, we've all got a little bit of a pain in our hearts still because of Daniel Ricciardo, but you can't say this wasn't a good weekend from him, and he's getting some really good results recently. Yep,
and I'm shocked that McLaren turned it around the way they did. We'd heard about when that car had the aerodynamics of a fridge at the start of the year, couldn't do anything on low speed, medium speed, or high speed tracks and corners. They always talked about from the start of the year, we got this update that's coming, it's going to be painful until then. We're all going, this is the marketing team coming out, you can't polish a turd, blah, blah, but it actually came and they got results straight away, and the gains were significant and it put them on the map. And that would have been the last thing I'd put money on at the start of the year, that McLaren would be performing like this, but we've really seen the turn from Aston Martin's start of the year and McLaren's finish of the year. They are polar opposites, they're polar opposites compared to where we thought they would be at the start of the year. So good on them. Zach Brown, still off him, but he's done well.
It's also a good reminder, I suppose, next year, maybe when we are getting into our fourth or fifth race of the season, to look back on this and you just see how many different directions it could go in. You have those teams that kind of don't really go anywhere. They have a bit of a meh season, and then you have others who go really strongly in a positive direction, others who seem to go backwards with their upgrades. So we can think about this moment next year when we start looking at who's coming out of the gates well in the 2024 season. Let's talk about Mercedes. I was cheering on Hamilton and it felt really weird, but there was just something about seeing him back up the top really confidently in a car that had great pace over the whole weekend, and it felt right to say it that way, I suppose. He had that really slow pit stop, so he put him out behind Lando, which was obviously really frustrating for him, but regained second place. Not until lap 49, though, he really had to work for it, and there was some exciting few corners just before where I could see, unfortunately, but we could hear the crowd. They'd tried for a one-stop. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for them, so they just had to adapt, which they did well overall, but that disqualification is going to hurt Hamilton badly in his effort to try and knock Sergio Perez off second in the Drivers' Championship. I just think it's good for the sport when someone like Hamilton is doing well and up there and challenging for podiums. There's just something about, I think, the competitive spirit that you get. And we really felt it in the crowd. People were really supportive of him. And that was something that I wouldn't say it necessarily surprised me, but you just suddenly realize how much each one of these drivers contribute to the sport and the competitive nature of what we're watching. Russell had a struggle this weekend. You know, he kind of did all right. But Toto said afterwards he didn't feel right in this car.
Yeah, look, I mean, the upgrade that Mercedes bought clearly worked as an organisation. You would expect that from the last decade they've had in this sport, that they're the cream of the crop, and they can integrate these upgrades into cars. We know that over the last couple of years that their design philosophy, they've been pretty pig-headed about this is the right way to go, but as soon as they've cut it, they've moved on to what everybody else has done. The design philosophy in the car, this car will get quick, and it'll only get quicker. I would hope we see another Red Bull Mercedes fight like we did in 2021 next year. I just think for the sport it'll be great. But Mercedes are back. I think they are. We will see this car get better and better. But the gap to Red Bull could be too big next year, because we know how much Red Bull have not invested this year and are focusing on next year. But yeah, you're right about Hamilton. He's great around this track and he loves this place. He's won here 6 or 7 times, I think. So, albeit in a car that was dominating, he does genuinely like this. And these are the weekends that Lewis performs. And when he performs on this level and then goes on a run of 4 or 5 races like that, that's when we start to question whether Russell is really up to it. Because we'll go to Mexico and Lewis loves that track too. If Lewis does this 3 or 4 races in a row, we're going to be like, geez, what's wrong with Russell?
Yeah.
And I think Russell is more competent than Lewis's teammates over the last few years have been, but it's hard for a driver too once he's getting consistently beaten down. Now Russell's been fairly competitive with Hamilton over their time as teammates together, and one lap pace is better than Hamilton over one lap, but it's that when Lewis is actually racing for something and racing for results, it's a different story.
Absolutely. He is an absolute hunter when it comes to being out of position and making an incredible race for those who are watching. So great to see him back up the top again. Finally, we'll talk about Red Bull. So Verstappen out of place in 6th after a lap time deleted in qualifying, but of course he did, finished in 1st. Perez qualified 9th, was in 5th, but a good weekend for Perez, generally speaking, despite the fact that he was not happy with his setup. He was struggling on the hards, but still now, up in 4th place. And after, like I said, after the DQs, that goes a long way when it comes to the Drivers' Championships. How are you feeling about Perez at the moment, Campy?
Oh, a dead man walking at the moment. He is done. I said he is done. I said last week, he needs to be within 3/10 of max in qualifying, and he needs to be on a podium every race. The fact that he comes in, and yes, I know the car hasn't been as quick as it has been, but when your teammate's winning and the way that he's winning for the last all season, basically, for him to not be an absolute shoo-in for second place is completely wrong. So, yeah, he's a dead man walking. Well, there's some big issues and rumours of issues in Red Bull at the moment too. So, I think that may throw a bit of the spanner in the works. Danny Ric getting into the senior team again moving forward. So I think Christian Horner's very much in Danny Ric's corner, but there is some tensions rumoured to be within that organisation between Helmut Marko and Christian Horner about the direction of the team moving forward. We know Dietrich Mateschitz passed away about a year and a bit ago now, so we know the Red Bull organisation has not been as loving and friendly to Red Bull as a team moving forward, and I think the power struggle is in who has ownership or the rights to this team moving forward, and who can read the bet, who can get the most amount of money for the team to be its sole principal, a bit like a Toto Wolff and how he controls Mercedes. So that's where the tension will be, and it sounds like Max has backed Helmut Marko in. So I think those tensions could be coming to fruition. Now, if Helmut Marko gets control of that team, Sergio Perez is gone. Snap of fingers, see you later, and they'll bring someone else in. It'd be a struggle for Danny Ric to get into that team before it happens. But I think there's a bit more to play out in this story, ownership of the team and direction and stuff, so it won't happen overnight. It might be a bit of a slow burn.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously they're in such a strong position on track, but it does feel like there is a little bit of kind of trouble in the water perhaps, and you never know how that is going to translate to performance, as well as the decisions that guide it. So watch this space potentially. But Perez, hopefully, after a reasonable weekend, feels good about going, of course, into his home race in Mexico next weekend. I met some Checo supporters this weekend, and there were a lot of them, but there were some in particular who were very passionate. So it was great to meet them, and they're following him around the world, and they just, in their heart of hearts, adore him. And what was really interesting is that for many of the Checo supporters that we chatted to, they love Checo, but not at the expense of anybody else. They weren't dissing all the other drivers. They just love Checo. And it's interesting because, of course, it was Mexico where we got all the booing last year. So that's maybe not the en masse reflection of the fans, but certainly the ones that we met were very passionate. Max, not too much to say here except for the fact that he had to work for it, which I think is, we kind of like seeing it because it's just a little bit less predictable perhaps in terms of what we'll see on track, and of course gives us some great racing. He had a slow pit stop as well, which nearly put a spanner in the works, but still came out in front of Norris and had some brake issues all weekend, and so was having to look after the tyres in a way that he doesn't usually have to. He had to work quite differently by the sounds of things.
Yeah, he was pretty frustrated during the race, actually. So they feel nothing like they did yesterday, carried on a bit like a child in the lead of a race. But I wonder too how much of it is just he has to show up and he's got to compete and he's got to race. He's sewn up the World Championship. I wonder how much they're just sort of giving Mercedes a bit of false hope about what they can do on track too. We know Max loves to play those games. He loves to. Yeah. He loves to just not beat people. He loves to crush them and absolutely shatter their souls in terms of racing. And it's perfect Max to come in and, we got problems. He was never going to lose that race. And apparently he should have been there all weekend too. So anyway, they'll be right. They'll be fine. And the other thing I'll say about Checo fans, we know how they feel. We've been Danny Ric supporters for the last few years.
Yep, exactly.
The difference being at the expense of other drivers too. Couldn't stand it. And I wanted to invade the homeland,
We are nowhere near as gracious, that is for sure. Campy, tell me, who was your driver of the day?
Oh, good question. I'm gonna have to give it to Hamilton. I don't think we've seen a drive like that from him this year. A whole weekend too. Sprint race, he had some pace and he was excited. It was about 5 or 6 laps there. He was within 2 seconds of Max and holding it. I think Hamilton. Yeah, I'll give it to him.
I'm really glad that you've checked the run sheet then, because you'll see that I've given it to Hamilton as well. Because for those exact reasons. Because it was a great drive. We saw a bit of Hamilton of old, and I think, like I said earlier, I think it's really good for the sport. But to keep things interesting, I am going to then. I'll give it to Yuki. After he nabbed fastest lap at the end, he had a great race. Nice little points haul, which he should be happy about.
Well deserved.
That is our team by team analysis for this week. Next week we go to Mexico, followed by Brazil, United States again to Las Vegas. I can't wait to see what trash show that is going to be. And then Abu Dhabi at the very end, of course. Thanks for joining me, Campy. We've still got a few episodes left, and hopefully we'll get our boy James back very soon. Final reflections of Circuit of the Americas.
Look, the greatest country in the world, isn't it? Texas. It's a great place, great atmosphere. It looked like fun. I was jealous I wasn't there with you. So next year, maybe next year. So look, it's an event, and it seems like every year this race gets bigger and better, and all the off track as an event and all the things going on around it. It's I think it'll be another jewel in the crown as an event moving forward, and everything in Texas is bigger, and I'm all about that. So bigger trucks, bigger flags, it's great.
Very good. All right. Thank you for joining me, and thank you, listeners, for joining us as well. If you want to support the show, you can head on over to our website and join our Patreon. Link is there. You could also pick up some merch, and of course our YouTube. We are chasing 1,000 subscribers. Hopefully by the time James gets back, we'll have hit that, so we can say that it was basically you and me, Campy, because I think that's obviously the logic that we can apply there. And you can also find us, of course, on Instagram. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next weekend.